There is a place in time where myth and science blur, where bones whisper of forgotten hunts, and a predator walks upright, not on four legs but two, the Neanderthal. They've long been painted as brutish cavemen, primitive and doomed to extinction. But what if we've been wrong? What if their extinction wasn't due to inferiority but because they were far more powerful than we imagined? And what if the most terrifying predator of the Ice Age wasn't a saber-toothed cat or cave lion but Neanderthal man himself? Welcome to Prehistoric Shadows. In today's expedition through time, we journey into the frostbitten caves and blood-soaked soils of Ice Age Europe to uncover the terrifying strength, skill, and symbolism of Neanderthals, the apex predator you never knew ruled. In 2023, deep in the forested soils of Bavaria, archaeologists at the Seedorf excavation site uncovered something that would challenge our assumptions about Ice Age life. It wasn't just the discovery of bonesit, it was a revelation about power, survival, and the blurred line between predator and prey. They unearthed a partial skeleton of a cave lion Panthera speleon animal known to have reigned as one of the top predators of its time. These lions could stretch over 10 feet in length and weigh more than 800 pounds. To the Neanderthal, this wasn't just a threat, it was the embodiment of death. But this skeleton wasn't ordinary. A close inspection revealed deliberate, narrow cut marks consistent with butchering. Even more telling was the puncture wound to the third, rib-deep, clean, and shaped by the thrust of a weapon. This wasn't an animal that died in a fight with another beast. This was a targeted kill. And the weapon that delivered it? A sharpened wooden spear, likely fire-hardened by Neanderthal hands. This wasn't scavenging. This was an ambush. This was an execution. It wasn't just the lion that was being hunted, it was our assumptions that were about to be torn apart. Let's take a closer look at the murder weapon. In a world without metal, without bows, and without modern leverage tools, Neanderthals turned to nature and mastered it. The spear used to kill the cave lion didn't have a stone point. It wasn't lined with obsidian or tipped with bone. It was, by all accounts, just a sharpened piece of wood. But don't let its simplicity fool you. Experimental archaeology has shown that fire-hardened wooden spears can penetrate deeply into flesh and bone when wielded with precision and force. And Neanderthals had both. Their muscular frames, coupled with shorter, stockier limbs, made them ideal for close-range thrusting. These weren't spears meant to be thrown from afar. These were weapons of proximity, of risk, of personal confrontation. Ballistics tests simulating the Seedorf wound demonstrated that such a thrust could indeed cause a puncture identical in shape and depth. That means Neanderthals not only understood how to craft such a weapon, but how to wield it lethally. They didn't need complexity, they needed effectiveness. And effectiveness is what they delivered again and again. The spear that killed the cave lion may not have had polish, but it had purpose, and that purpose was death. It also represents something greater, a level of technological and anatomical understanding we don't typically associate with prehistoric humans. They knew where to strike, they knew how deep, and they knew when. That knowledge, passed down through generations, was nothing less than a form of unspoken science etched not on parchment, but in muscle memory and instinct. When most people think of Neanderthals, they imagine brute, strength-clumsy fists and primitive grunts. But emerging evidence tells a different story. The real power of the Neanderthal wasn't just in their limb-sit, it was in their minds. The kill at Seedorf wasn't chaotic. It was calculated. The location of the wound low on the rib cage suggests the lion was lying down, possibly asleep or already injured. To approach a resting predator, to strike with enough force and accuracy to pierce through hide and bone without triggering an instant counterattack, requires more than courage. It demands foresight, timing, and tactical intelligence. Neanderthals were ambush hunters. They tracked prey, mapped landscapes, used cover, and likely coordinated with others. Their brain size was, on average, equal to or larger than ours, and while their cognitive style may have differed, it wasn't inferior. They could plan, they could problem solve. They could predict behavior both human and animal. We also have evidence from other Neanderthal sites of complex behavior, the use of pigments, possible burials, and symbolic objects. This was not a creature merely reacting to the world, it was an individual navigating it with conscious thought. When that lion died, it wasn't the result of chaos. It was the culmination of an idea, a tactic, a plan, executed with surgical precision. In this case, the lion wasn't just bested by strength, it was outwitted. And that shift from strength to strategies, what redefines Neanderthals as not just survivors, but apex predators. The cave lion wasn't just another beast in the forest. It was the king of the Ice Age dominant, feared and nearly untouchable. Killing one was not only a physical feat, it was a statement, a transformation of status. And the Neanderthal who stood over its corpse became more than a hunter. He became legend. Cut marks on cave lion paw bones suggest careful removal of the claws, not just for consumption, but likely for display. The paws weren't torn off in frenzy, they were separated with precision. In cultures across the world, from the Maasai of Africa to the Scythians of Central Asia, wearing the skin or claws of a predator was a ritual act, a sign of maturity, power, or divine connection. What if the Neanderthal was no different? Picture this. A stocky figure, wrapped in the pelt of a lion, enters a gathering. He doesn't need to boast. The claws that sway on his chest, the faint golden fur across his shoulders, they speak for him. This wasn't just decoration, it was a declaration. I faced death, and I won. The lion, once a symbol of primal fear, was repurposed into a symbol of dominion. Through this act, the Neanderthal may have not only survived his world, he mastered it, wore it, became part of its mythology. Perhaps even their early rituals, the foundations of human spirituality, were born from moments like this, where blood met belief and survival met significance. There's a haunting question at the center of this story. Why would a Neanderthal risk everything to hunt a cave lion? The answer may lie not in survival, but in psychology, social meaning, and ancestral legacy. Cave lions weren't typical prey. They weren't hunted for meat in large numbers. They weren't passive. They were the predator's predator. To stalk and kill one wasn't about hunger, was about power. Some researchers believe such kills were symbolic acts of initiation, tests of leadership, or even rites of revenge against a deadly rival in the food chain. Modern parallels can be found among indigenous cultures today. The Maasai of East Africa once practiced lion hunting as a rite of passage, proof of courage and adulthood. The San people of southern Africa are known to intimidate lions off kills to assert dominance. And in ancient Rome, soldiers wore lion pelts to declare their supremacy in battle. If Neanderthals saw the cave lion as a symbolic threat, a monster whose defeat granted status, the hunt becomes more than just a moment of danger. It becomes a performance, a story, a legacy passed through generations. And consider this. Perhaps it wasn't a lone hunter. Perhaps it was a group, coordinated, strategic, celebrating their kill, not just as survival but as identity. In the Ice Age, the difference between fear and fame may have been marked by claws worn on your chest. More and more, we are learning that Neanderthals didn't just kill, they remembered, they honored. At sites like Einhorn-Höhle in Germany, researchers found lion paw bones with delicate cut marks around the claws, evidence that they were carefully removed for display or ritual use. And it doesn't end with lions. Eagle talons, fossil shells, red ochre, all found in Neanderthal contexts. Not for utility, but for meaning. These weren't cavemen grunting in caves. These were humans expressing something profound through art, adornment, and perhaps even belief. Some archaeologists now argue that the symbolic world of Neanderthals was far richer than we once believed. They buried their dead. They marked territory. They may have told stories through objects, through memory, through silence. In this light, the cave lion becomes more than a kill. It becomes a totem, a spirit, a challenge faced, a fear conquered, a myth made tangible. The claws hung around the neck, the pelt draped across the back. These weren't just trophies, they were symbols of identity, proof that the hunter had entered the domain of death and returned. And in the echo of that story, we glimpse something startlingly familiar. We see ourselves. In modern imagination, Neanderthals often occupy the role of the hunted beaten back by changing climates, diseases, or the arrival of Homo sapiens. But discoveries like Seedorf flip the script. They show us something far more dangerous. Neanderthals weren't running from predators. They were challenging them. When a human being stares into the golden eyes of a lion, it isn't just a survival contest. It's a confrontation between instinct and will. Neanderthals stepped into that arena willingly with sharpened spears, group tactics, and nerve forged by necessity. They didn't bow to the apex predator, they became one. That transition from prey to predator is more than biological. It's philosophical. It speaks to a creature that didn't just endure its world but sought to master it. That saw threats not just as things to avoid but as challenges to overcome. It's a psychology of risk, of confrontation, of transformation. And that's what makes the Seedorf discovery more than just a fossil dig. It's a monument to the moment when man, or something very close to man, looked fear in the face and didn't flinch. They weren't waiting to be forgotten. They were writing their story in tooth marks and clawed trophies, long before ink was ever invented. The Ice Age eventually closed its frigid curtain on the Neanderthals. Whether through climate shifts, competition with Homo sapiens, or genetic absorption, they vanished from the living world but not from the soil, not from the bones, and certainly not from the truth. For decades, they were caricatured as evolutionary failures, primitive, mute, and doomed. But the growing record of symbolic behavior, tool use, strategic hunting, and social depth is forcing us to rewrite the story. And in that retelling, the Neanderthal emerges not as a footnote but as a chapter of humanity's own soul. They didn't merely exist, they thought, they mourned, they chose bravery over safety. The lion's rib pierced by a wooden spear is more than an archaeological fact. It is a window into a mind that feared and yet fought, into a society that marked memory with objects, into a people that walked the line between human and legend. Their strength wasn't just physical, it was existential. They lived in a world of cold, teeth, and silence, and filled it with survival, symbolism, and echoes of something deeply human. Every fossil, every punctured rib, every scraped talon brings us closer not to strangers but to forgotten kin. So what do we learn from the shadow of the Neanderthal? From the silent bones of a lion that once ruled the mammoth steppe? We learn that power takes many forms, that to be human is not just to speak, or farm, or write, but to face fear and make meaning from it. That even 50,000 years ago, there were stories being written in scars, in skins, in the ritual act of standing one's ground. The Neanderthal didn't wait for permission to matter. He challenged the beast that ruled the world and left behind not just a carcass, but a legacy, a whisper in the dark caves of history that says, "We were here. We were strong, and we mattered." If this journey through ancient courage and prehistoric power moved, you don't forget to subscribe to Prehistoric Shadows. Because sometimes, to understand where we're going, we need to remember who stood their ground in the beginning. The past isn't dead, it breathes through bones, and in the story of the Neanderthal, it roars.